Hello, and welcome to Tucson Festival of Books 2023. My name is Carl, and I'm from the Pima County Public Library. And with me today are members of the Woods Memorial Library Health Action Team. And we are going to interview Adam Rex, author most recently of Digestion, a musical. Take it away, guys.
Hi, I'm Travis.
Hi.
So, if Digestion the musical was adapted into a Hollywood film, which actors would you cast as Lil Candy and Gum?
Ooh. Oh, man. I should already have an answer to that question. I don't know, what do you all think? I'd like to hear some suggestions.
I think Ariana Grande would make a great Lil Candy.
Mm-hmm. All right. Olivia Rodrigo, maybe?
Oh yeah, she would definitely be good.
Gum.
Who's that guy in all the Bill Murray? He would be good.
Bill Murray?
Yeah, he's a little bit old, but...
Yeah, I guess Gum doesn't have to sing either. I was thinking who's like a rugged leading man who sings. I was thinking Hugh Jackman, but Gum doesn't actually sing in the book anyway. But good question. I keep thinking about that. Maybe it's something pop into my head as we go along.
It'd definitely be a blockbuster.
Thank you. It's kind of you said.
Okay, I'm Savannah, and Digestion, the musical, is in a relatively unusual format.
Yeah.
What was writing it like? Did it feel more like writing a book or more like writing a play?
It kind of just felt like writing a book. I don't know. I mean, I read a lot of picture books, and some of them are in verse, some of them are in rhyming verse. So, the idea of a picture book being entirely in rhyming verse is not unusual at all. If anything, I think the strange format here is that it goes back and forth like a musical does between just spoken bits and rhyming verse. And I understand that I'm confusing a lot of people because people keep asking me, like, how do I read this? Oh, you just read it. It's a picture book. It rhymes, But I've tricked a lot of people into thinking that it has to be sung. And I don't think it's going to do this book any favors that everybody thinks that. But I definitely had musicals in mind when I was writing it. I did a little bit of that in high school myself. And I wasn't any good at it, so I didn't do any more of it after that. But there's still like a real fondness in my heart for musical theater. So it's kind of the second book I've written that is ostensibly supposed to be sung and danced. There's another one I wrote called Nothing Rhymes with Orange, which is a book about fruit, and this poor orange is constantly in the background because nothing rhymes with him and he doesn't get to be a part of it. I keep coming back to it.
So, my name is Anna, and is there someone in your life who inspired Digestion the musical or any other books that you've written?
Well, Digestion the musical, I feel like sometimes it's really easy to tell where the book came from. This one was kind of an amalgam of a few things. When I was first starting to get serious at, I'm going to be a children's book author and illustrator, how do I do that? And I started trying to write things, and I didn't have any good ideas, no original ideas. Some of the ideas I would get would just be, maybe I could just write a bunch of poems about X, Y, or Z. I wrote a whole book of poems about monsters, and that actually did turn into a book. I thought maybe I'll write a bunch of poems about the human body, and it'll teach kids about the body, but there'd be funny poems about how appendix is so angry it could burst or whatever. And I filed that away in my head, but I never really did anything with it. And then in 2014, we adopted my son, and I went from never saying the word potty to saying the word potty suddenly constantly. I never thought I would be the kind of dad that would use that word, but I don't know, it just crept in there, and suddenly I'm saying it, and I am the kind of dad that starts making puns about stuff. So, when I'm using the word potty, I started saying, let's get this potty started, and that kind of thing. And so I think all of that kind of mashed together in my head, and I thought, I need to make a potty dance party kind of a book. So I was working on that for a while, and then over time it morphed into this Broadway musical thing. And that was directly influenced by adopting my son, definitely. I have another book coming out sometime soon. It's another one that I didn't illustrate, so I'm just waiting on the illustrator to finish it. That answers this question better than Digestion, I suppose. It's called Tumble Baby, and it's inspired directly by the fact that when we adopted my son, we were in Korea. We weren't allowed to leave yet. We were just in a hotel room, basically all together, and so we were putting him in a bed. He was 22 months old. We didn't have a crib there. And when he slept, he would just roll. And he would roll right off the bed if we let him. So we had to put things around him. We'd stuff pillows around him, and he'd roll over the pillows. At night, my wife and I would sleep on either side of him, and he would roll over us somehow in his sleep. So I wrote a story, like a tall tale about a baby who never wakes up throughout the whole book, but the baby rolls all over this great country of ours, like doing good deeds and helping people without ever waking up. And so that's Tumble Baby, and that'll hopefully be out in another year or two. Who's next?
How has COVID affected your career, writing, inspiration, etc.?
COVID, I guess it hasn't had that big of an effect on me. I was always working at home. So during COVID, when I would have been forced to work at home anyway, I was already writing and illustrating out of my house. The difference was suddenly my son was also learning second grade out of my house, and I had to help him with that. And my wife was teaching sixth grade out of our house upstairs, and I had to stay out of her way. So I think it really only affected my career in the sense that everything just got kind of harder to do. And I guess that's the way it sort of affected all of us. Nothing specific.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kitana.
Hi.
So you're an illustrator by training. Why did you become an author, and how do you decide which books to illustrate by yourself?
When I started as an illustrator, what I really wanted to do was children's books. I kind of figured out when I was probably about your age, that when I was like 16, 17, I was working after school at a bookstore, and I fell in love with children's books all over again while working at that store. It was kind of a quiet store. We didn't get a lot of customers, so I'd always sneak over to the children's section and look at the picture books and think to myself, these books are beautiful, and these stories are great, and I would like to do that. But when I first started my career, I was really just doing illustrations for like fantasy games, Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. I used to do a lot of work for that. All the while thinking, this is great for now, it's paying my bills, but what I really want to do is do kids' books. So I started trying I would be perfectly happy just illustrating other people's books, but I started trying to write my own as well, right from the beginning. And it just kind of took a while to first convince the children's book industry that they should let me work on any book at all, and then after I had illustrated a couple, convincing those same editors that they should take a chance on my writing. But I managed to, the first editor I worked with didn't really like my writing, but luckily the second did, so I've been doing that ever since. But then eventually, I started thinking it would be fun to write something that I didn't illustrate. I was getting to work with authors I liked, but I was never going to be able to work with illustrators I loved if I always illustrated my own work. And I wrote this book called School's First Day of School. It's a picture book about a brand new school that just got built, and he's nervous about his first day of children. And I had no idea how to illustrate this book, because the main character is a building. And I wasn't sure how much to make the building a real character with like a face or something. How much do I anthropomorphize the building, or do I just illustrate a building and not give it a personality and just let the narration do the work? I wasn't sure how to do it, and I could tell that it was not going to be a good book to be painted in my usual style, so I thought, maybe this is the first one where I ought to see if I can hand it over to somebody else. I kept thinking to myself, if I illustrated, I really wanted to look like Christian Robinson's work. And I thought, if I illustrated, I'm going to rip off Christian Robinson, I can tell. So then we thought, well, maybe we can just get Christian Robinson to do it. And that worked out. So ever since then, when I write things, I ask myself, am I really actually the best person for this book? Because I just want the book to be the best book it can be. Maybe I'm not the best illustrator for it. So some books I do and some I don't. And if I write something and I don't illustrate it, that gives me a little more time so that if an author comes to me with a manuscript that they need illustrated and I love that, I get a chance to do that as well.
Yeah, and along with that, what are some of the best things about being an author and illustrator?
I mean, really the best thing, it's not specifically about being an author or illustrator. What's the best thing about my life is I'm doing the thing that I would be doing anyway if you didn't pay me. So I think that's the thing to aspire to no matter what it is. For me, it just happens to be making children's books. But, you know, I'm so satisfied with that aspect of my life. I don't have to be, you know, every book I put out doesn't have to be a bestseller. I want them to be bestsellers. But the fact that I just get to do this thing that I love, that I would be doing anyway, is the biggest deal to me. And then apart from that, it's nice just being my own boss, essentially. I work at home, I work when I feel like it. There's a problem with that, of course, because sometimes you don't feel like it, you actually have to work, but all those things put together, I suppose, is like what's really great about my life as far as I'm concerned.
So kind of on the flip side of that, what hardships come with being a writer, illustrator in the industry that you're in?
Hardships. Sometimes I feel like I'm always working because there's always some part of my brain that's turning over something and I don't get to leave my work at work. So I'm always worried that I'm going to sort of shortchange my son and my wife because of that. So I have to be really careful about that. And otherwise, I think sometimes there is just the problem with motivation when you realize that I'm just at home in my pajamas and I could just go binge something on TV and not work, and I have to not do that. You know, I have to stay motivated to kind of pretend like there is somebody looking over my shoulder all the time, that I'm just sitting in the cubicle and the boss could walk by at any moment. The boss just happens to be me, and you know, the boss is a jerk. So I have to keep busy as much as possible and try not to waste as much time on the internet as I usually do.
So are any of your stories inspired by mental health issues?
No, I don't think I would say that they are. Well, I mean, it's all a spectrum, right? I mean, things that I write, I'm always trying to tap into genuine feeling and conflict and emotion. And so, you know, I think it would be subjective whether you call any of those things mental health issues or not. But I personally have never been diagnosed with any mental health issue, and I have never seen anybody for that, and I wonder if that would be good for me. I have a lot of friends who see counselors and therapists just as a matter of course, and I think, well, they seem pretty put together, maybe I ought to be doing that. But was that question inspired by any particular?
Yeah, I was thinking about School Spirits Today.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, that one came out of, when it comes to picture books, there are a lot of picture book, cliches is not a nice word, but you do see a lot of books where a kid or a bear wearing a vest or whatever is nervous about their first day of school. And so I was actually at a party with a bunch of other kids book people, and we were talking about these kinds of cliches, like, oh, a kid is upset because there's going to be a new baby in the house and they're jealous, or the kid's nervous about their first day of school, or the kid doesn't want to move, and it's a story about that. And so when people talked about kid being nervous about their first day of school, the way my brain works is that I'm always flipping things backwards to see if there's anything there. So I immediately thought of school as nervous about his first day of children, and realized, oh, that might be something. So I told my agent about it the next day, and he said, yeah, I could probably sell that idea in like 15 minutes, so you should probably write that. So it's kind of where that came from. Honestly, I guess I have to just cop to the fact that it started as a picture book cliche that has been written 1,000 times, but that kind of doesn't matter. Like, a lot of the great stories are really pretty cliche, I think, and if you find a new way to tell it, or if you tell it with a unique point of view or voice, then I really think you can get away with writing any story at all, no matter how many times it's been told.
Yeah, so how do you deal with writer's block?
Writer's block is something that I don't know if I worry about it as much as some people. As an illustrator, there's a decent chance that if I don't know what to write next, I can't figure out how to solve this next problem, I probably have something else to work on. So I pop over and I be an illustrator for a while and trust that some part of my brain is still working on the problem in the background, or will have a solution for me when I wake up the next morning, because that is often the case. Like, I think it's amazing how often I go to sleep with a problem and wake up with a solution. But otherwise, I don't think of writer's block as being anything particularly special to writers. I think it's just having a problem you don't know how to solve, yeah, I guess my solution is to just kind of keep busy and know that staring at a white screen is probably not going to bring the answer to me, but maybe taking the dog for a walk is. And like I said, it always kind of churns in the background, I think, and the solution comes eventually.
So what was the process of adapting the Tremedius Smecte into a film?
Yeah, that was definitely a lucky thing. It was reviewed in the New York Times, my book was, which is not true of most books. So it's kind of a big deal. It's almost like getting an award, just getting reviewed in the New York Times. Like, it'll sell a lot of books, and it really brings a lot of attention to your book. And some of the attention it brought was that this particular director at DreamWorks decided to buy it based on the review, and was going to read it to his sons. And the story he tells is that he started reading it to his sons one night, put them to bed, took it out into the living room, just kept reading it because he didn't want to stop, and took it into DreamWorks the next day and said, I want this to be my next movie, which is, ridiculously lucky that happened. And I don't expect to be able to repeat that again probably during my career. But then they got into contact and asked if it would be something that I'd be into, and I knew my position. I knew I wasn't like some blockbuster best-selling author that could tell them, okay, you can make my book into a movie and this is how you're going to do it. So I understood that I should probably just, sign a contract, have my agents look at the contract, but sign a contract that lets them do whatever they want. And they took the story and worked on it for years. They optioned it in, I think, early 2008, and that movie didn't come out until 2015. And it wasn't until 2011 that I was even sure that they were going to make the movie at all. They option a lot of stories and then they just don't go anywhere. They give up on them after a while. So during those years, they were very nice about it. They kept on having me out to their campus and showing me what they were working on, and talking about what they were thinking and asking me my opinion, but with the understanding that they were not necessarily going to listen to my opinion if I had one. But it was nice. I liked them. I liked what they did with the story. And I gotta say, I feel better about the movie at this point than I do about my book. My book, I don't know if any of you have read any of it. It's basically, it's like a colonialism allegory. I had this idea, I was reading a lot of history and thinking that when I was 11 years old, I did not necessarily sympathize with the right people when I was learning about history. I would hear about the terrible treatment of Native Americans, and I would feel bad about that, and I wouldn't want to feel bad, so I would try to justify it in my mind of why it must have been okay what we did to Native American nations. And, you know, I must have known that that was lousy, a lousy way of thinking, because I remembered it so many years later that I had thought those things, but I thought, I want to write a book that's about basically getting colonized so that a kid will read it and they'll be putting themselves in the place of the person getting colonized rather than the colonizers. So I tried to write a funny book about aliens that kids would want to read, but I wanted to have sort of these analogs to different things that actually happened in American history. And later I realized, well, that was something I didn't really have any business doing. You know, that's not my history. Me deciding to take some of the tragedies of people that are not my own and turn it into a funny alien book, I have regrets about that now. So now, 2023, I feel sort of better about that movie than I do about my own book. And I've sort of put that book behind me. And when people ask about it, I tell them this because I feel like my duty now is to tell people that I made a mistake, but probably won't be my last. So for now, I just want to kind of spread the word about it.
Absolutely.
My name is CJ.
Hi.
Would you go back and change what you've written with the Tribune Spectate, or would you, like, if you wanted to accomplish that same goal, would you attempt it again, or you just?
That's a really good question. I don't know what kind of book I would have written what I would write if I was writing it now. I mean, there's also a lot of talk, and nobody's ever really taken me to task for this, but the main character of that book is an 11-year-old black girl. And it's not a book about the black experience or anything, in which I definitely have no business writing, but there's, when I wrote it, I wasn't really thinking as much as I am now about how stories need to be more often told by, the voices of the people who, reflect the characters in the story. That was kind of a word salad, but you know what I mean? I feel like more often, that story should have been written by a black woman rather than by me. If I wrote it now, would I still make the main character a black girl? I'm not sure, and I don't know what the right answer is about that, because I do know that this thing got turned into a movie, and that a lot of black girls were really happy that there was a movie with a black girl protagonist, and maybe that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't written the book, but I don't know if that's a justification or not. So even that aspect of it, I don't know if I would have written it that way. And I don't think I would have been so cavalier about taking Native American history and trying to make an allegory there. There was some talk about actually updating the book a little bit, and I think the issue there is that we just never, the book had been out long enough that it hasn't gone to a new printing yet, so we'd have to wait until they actually went back to the printing press to make a new printing in order to change it, but I sent them off a number of edits, not huge things, like I couldn't take out all the mistakes I made in the book, but there were certain little things that I had come to understand were mistakes over the years that I wanted to change, but that actually hasn't happened to my knowledge. I don't think that there's been another printing of the book since all these issues came to mind.
What does your typical workday look like?
I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and get my son ready for school and make him breakfast, and then because he and my wife, he goes to the same school my wife teaches at, they get in the car, and then unbeknownst to them, I go back to sleep. I try not to talk about that. I think my wife secretly knows, but she's just nice enough not to call me on it, but I go back to sleep. And I sleep for another hour or two, and then I get up and walk the dog and spend too much time on the internet, and at some point in like the late morning I realize I haven't done anything yet. And then I start feverishly working on whatever I'm working on. But from there, there's no such thing as a typical day, because there might be a stretch of a few months where I'm doing nothing but painting every day. I'm not doing any writing at all because I'm just illustrating a picture book at that moment. Or I might be deep in the middle of writing a new novel or editing a novel that I've already written. So there's a lot of different things. I could just be sketching, could be trying to figure out what the characters in a story are going to look like, or doing finished artwork, or I might be sculpting a little model of a character. That's something I do a lot, where if I know that I'm going to be painting a picture of the same character over and over again, and I want to make sure all those characters look consistent, and I don't know anybody who happens to look like that character because it's Frankenstein or whatever, then maybe I will sculpt a little Frankenstein out of sculpting clay and bake it and paint it, and then have something that I can look at from any angle that helps me with my drawings. So, I don't know, I guess that's a long way around of saying that there hardly is a typical day, except that I usually go back to sleep after my wife and kids leave.
So my name is Hannah, and kind of returning back to your point on centering certain issues in your work.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you do to make your writing, especially ones that discuss topics like colonialism or other pretty heavy topics, appealing to young readers, and what draws them in.
Yeah, so there's kind of a catch-22 there, because I really do want to make that appealing to young readers with the true meaning of smecta. My thought was, I want to make a really funny, adventurous, road trip, alien invasion book that tricks the kids into thinking a new way about colonialism or what have you. So what I really wanted to do was make something that was just fun. Maybe even the kid wouldn't get it in the first read, but then maybe later on in history class when we're learning about the Trail of Tears or relocation to reservations or something like that they might think, oh, just like the humans were all moved to Florida in this book and then moved to Arizona to be put on human preserves, like that was the same kind of thing. And now I kind of understand a little bit more what that might feel like. That's probably too much to even say, but anyway, catch-22, like I said, in that I think maybe I made a book that was funny and frivolous enough that maybe it didn't really do justice to that subject matter. I don't know, I'm still thinking about it. I think those people who criticize that are right, and I'm still thinking about what my duties are as a cis-het white male author who does not want to just write cis-het white male characters, like what I should be doing. Right now I'm in the middle of writing something where the main characters are twins, and in my mind they were adopted Korean twins. And part of that is because I think it's weird that I haven't written something where the characters look like my son yet. But again, I don't know, I feel like it's still in flux in my mind what I ought to be doing and what I ought to have permission to do and what I don't. So, I don't know, maybe by the time that book comes out, you'll see it and it's a couple of white kids because I changed my mind about that. I don't know if I should do that or not.
Well, I'm a twin.
Oh, are
So,
you?
yeah, and I'm also an Asian twin, and I feel like there's definitely a nuanced conversation there, so I definitely wouldn't censor, I guess, yourself.
Yeah, and nobody's censoring me either. I'm not complaining about anything. I'm trying to think about what my own actual place is. And sort of the way I think about it, and I guess I'm curious what you all think too, like, I feel like maybe I should write characters that reflect the diversity of the actual world, as long as I'm not writing the stories that should be told by, there's a phrase that's used a lot in the industry, own voices. I don't know if that's a common, own voices is a movement to say that, like, you know, people like me shouldn't be writing about the Black Panthers in the 1960s or something, and like what it would be like to be in that movement. Like that's, I should not be writing that, but, you know, if I'm writing a funny alien story and I want to make the main character Black, maybe that's okay.
I think I definitely agree with that viewpoint because as long as you aren't telling a story of the Black experience or you're not telling a story of the adopted Asian experience, I think there's a lot of good that can come from just centering people of color in the same kind of fun stories as typical children's fiction and stuff like that. So.
I hope people agree with you because I have a YA novel coming out later this year, and it's the main characters are a white girl and a Black boy, and I've been thinking to myself, am I doing this to myself again? That, you know, you always open yourself up to criticism anytime you publish anything, but and again, that's not a book that's about the Black experience, so I'm hoping people will forgive it because like I just got this hang up that I don't want to only tell white stories either. I feel like I'm part of the problem then, but like really the solution I think is just more writers from all walks of life getting to write, and the problem historically is that, you know, in all aspects of life, but definitely in kids' books and YA books, like white guys have just gotten extra credit. We always get extra credit. It used to be, it's always been true. I feel like I talk to a lot of female authors that go and visit schools, and they talk about how hard it is to get school visits, and schools want male authors to come talk to their kids all the time, and that's, you know, that's something that has always been easier for me as well, like visiting schools and talking about my work. And I remember teachers early in my career saying, we like having you at our school because you can talk to all the kids. And I thought, at the time, what does that mean? I don't know, I'll just smile and nod, and then later I realized that teacher meant the boys will listen to you too. And I have a friend, Shannon Hale, she, you might know her stuff, she writes a lot of books. She's been to schools where, you know, she was literally introduced as, girls, you're in for a treat. Here's Shannon Hale, boys, I expect you to be on your best behavior. You know, just not even trying to take the opportunity to suggest to these boys that, like, this might be something you'd be interested in too. And anyway, you're not in math class right now, aren't you happy? You're in an assembly, like, you know. So listen to this lady and give her books a shot. It's like, I don't know, that upsets me, and I realize that I had a very charmed career in a lot of ways for that reason.
I think that awareness kind of reflects that you are doing what you can and should with your platform. So
maybe, and it would be really easy also for me to think, good, I'm going to pat myself on the back now and stop thinking about it, so I'm just going to try to keep thinking about it. But I'm sorry about these long, rambling answers.
It's interesting. I
about
like it.
Okay, I hope so.
Yeah. And then my next question is just what advice would you give to aspiring authors, especially younger aspiring authors?
Well, don't think the way I thought when I was your age, which was mostly, I'm going to be a writer when I grow up. And I didn't write enough when I was a kid. I drew all the time, but like writing kept on feeling like something I was going to figure out later. And so all of the terrible mistakes that I made with all of my early stories, I made, you know, when I was in college instead of high school or middle school. I think you have to give yourself permission to write bad stuff because you're going to, and you're never going to get started if you don't. So, you know, I still say that even now, like, I've made some 40 books or something, and I still have to give myself permission to write badly because I know that my first draft is going to be garbage. It always is. But I have to, again, as Shannon Hale, I'm talking about her almost as much as me. As Shannon Hale says, like, you know, the first draft is just shoveling the sand. You can build stuff out of the sand later, but you got to get that sand. So that's the way I am. I always want to tell kids during school visits that I am not a planner. I read them a story that I wrote when I was 8 years old that is just nonsense, and I say, you can tell that I did not know what I was doing when I wrote this story, right? I did not plan anything. I didn't know how it was going to end before I got started. I just made it up as I went along, and then I got near the bottom of the page and thought, I'm running out of the room, so I wrote the end, and that was it. And so then I always ask these, like, third graders to say, how many of you think that I still write like a third grader? And some hands go up, and I say, how many of you think I still don't know what I'm doing? Some hands start to come down. I don't plan anything, I just make it up as I go, and everybody's putting their hands down. Now, a serious 49-year-old would not still do that. But then I say, no, actually, I still write like an 8-year-old. I make it up as I go along. The only difference now is that when I get to the end and I read my story and I realize, oh, this is bad, that I go back and I rewrite it and I rewrite it. And rewriting is where I feel like I find the good stuff. But half of the authors I talk to are exactly like me, and the other half can't write anything if they don't have a plan first. You know, they need to plan the whole book out, or they wouldn't write anything at all. And if you told me to plan the whole book out, I wouldn't even write anything at all. So it's another wrinkly answer, but I feel like you need to give yourself permission to write badly, and you have to figure out what is your right way to write, and don't worry about what any of your teachers have told you about that. You know, if Mrs. whoever or Mr. that guy told you that you have to write an outline or that you have to know this or that. Like, good news is I don't know what I'm doing either, and I've been doing it for 20 years, so you don't really have to know what you're doing either before you get started.
To wrap up this interview, are there any questions that you wanted to be asked in an interview before that we haven't covered already?
That's a really good question, but no, I think maybe if you had asked me that, we hadn't talked about the true meaning of Smecte, maybe this is the part where I feel obligated to do my penance about the true meaning of Smecte, but I kind of feel like these have been good questions. Is there anything else anything that you don't have written down that I made you think of along the way?
Are there any hopes for a film adaptation of Digestion the musical?
I would love it, honestly. I doubt that there's going to be a film adaptation. I did send it just because to a guy that I talked to at DreamWorks, just thinking like, you never know, but you know, he called me up and said, thanks for the book. And I was, okay, that's never going to happen. But what I really hope for is a lot of picture books get adapted for the stage. So theater groups adapt picture books and make a little half-hour, 45 minutes play based on a picture book. And of course, this one would be perfect. And I want somebody who is better at writing music than I am to write good music for it. And someday I want to be invited to see the opening night of some theater groups, first show of Digestion musical. But for now, I'm just crossing my fingers about that. Thank you. Anything else? All right, that's it.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.